Hey, beautiful people. This is Seibo with another episode of the Silicon Valley to Spirituality Show. This week, I have Seth Ramser. He is a life coach, and we talk about so many beautiful things. We talk about how he became more abundant by giving more, how he reconnected to himself through breath work and meditation. And most importantly, he shares a story about potentially unaliving himself and how it reconnected him with God. So before we jump in, if you have been enjoying this podcast, I would appreciate a like, a review, sharing it with a friend, anything that could help us grow. It would truly, truly be very meaningful to me if you could do that. And without further ado, let's jump into the podcast. All right, everybody, welcome to the Seibo No Show, where we go from Silicon Valley all the way to spirituality. Today, I have a very special guest. His name is Jack Ramser. He is the Director of Business Development over at Signature MD, and I wanted to have him on because we share a common friend, Jack Hornberger, and he's a really awesome guy. So any friend of Jack's is a friend of mine. Welcome to the show, Seth.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. All right. Well, I gave a little brief intro about you, but is there anything else that you'd like to add that I missed out on?
Now, I am a big fan of yours, actually, so I'm really honored to be here on the show. I've been following your presence on LinkedIn and Instagram for a while now, and it's really cool to get to sit down and speak with you finally.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I'm very appreciative. And, I noticed that you had commented on some of my posts, and then I just kind of would see some of the comments you would have on other people's posts, and I got this idea of, man, this is a really cool person, and I would love to speak to him. And, the idea behind my podcast is I believe that everyone has a very, very important story to share with people. I don't believe you have to be a CEO, an entertainer, an influencer in order to share your story. I believe actually the best stories are the ones that are from people like you and me. I perceive myself as a very normal person. I go to work, I have a family, I do a lot of regular things, but I also know that some of my experience or many of my experiences, as I shared them with more people, I could see how impactful they were. And it started to get me thinking about a lot of the podcasts that I used to do. I would only interview other founders, other entrepreneurs, and while their stories are quite amazing and inspirational, at least for me, very, very kind of like common origin stories of like, something happened to me when I was younger. I wanted to be like the best or the biggest or the fastest or whatever it may be. That's why I became a CEO. And as I started growing spiritually, I started seeing that, yeah, these external accomplishments, they're all great, but how are you growing internally? Are you connecting to something greater than yourself? Is what you're doing actually helping other people other than just yourself? And so, as I said, I really resonated with just the way that you carried yourself online. So I'm very, very happy to have you here. And, my first question is always very similar, which is, how do you combine spirituality with your professional life? And maybe even before answering that is, what is your kind of definition of spirituality and how do you practice spirituality?
Sure. And yeah, great question. I love how you framed that. When you do kind of get into that model of having one particular type of guest on the show, you can become pigeonholed, for lack of a better term. And I think when speaking of spirituality and the presence of God, it's really important to get into the granular. It has to be at the ground level amongst everyone because I believe that the Spirit of God does flow in between everything. And so that's been my experience. As far as, my daily practice, I'm not a very religious person, but I do identify as a Jesus follower. I am big into meditation and taking ironic delight in the divine synchronicities of existence, if you will. And so that's really been my biggest motivator for my belief in God and seeing His presence in everything. And so I'm not sure if that answered your question, but I wanted to first start there and say thank you again for giving me this opportunity. I love the idea for the show. For me, the way that God's presence manifests in my life, I had always had a strong relationship as far as the loving relationships within my life, but it wasn't until I focused on my professional life and where I was making an impact that I was really able to fall into the relying on God's presence in my life to really see uh, leaps and bounds improvement in my professional life. Um, for me, I always wanted to embody a spirit of abundance. That's my highest core value, is to live abundantly. And I was always able to love abundantly. Um, I was always able to give of myself abundantly, but I was always lacking in what I would call financial abundance, which unfortunately can be the most important one from time to time. And what I've found is there has to be a divine pruning in you if you are going to receive truly what you seek. For instance, if you want to expand your influence, you must shrink your ego. If you want to receive abundantly, you must learn to first give abundantly. So it wasn't really until I started to give abundantly of my time, of my resources, namely donating my time through volunteer work and also giving through the form of a tithe to my church or to local homeless organizations here in Indianapolis, that I really started to feel the financial blessings that I'd been seeking for so long.
Wow. Wow, that's so cool. A couple of things stood out to me in what you said. Number one was you defined abundance in a much more broader way. You talked about having abundance of time, abundance of love, abundance of great relationships in your life. Then you talked about having an abundance of financial wealth. And what really resonated with me is that you talked about you started receiving more financial abundance as you started giving more. And I think for a lot of people that want more financial abundance, logically speaking, they would think, well, I need more financial abundance. If I'm giving more, that's giving away my financial abundance. So I'm really curious, how did you come to this conclusion of, hey, to give more, I could get more?
It was actually, again, I can only describe it as, those divine synchronicities. I had three people that I trusted uh, very closely in my life who I went to, who had the things that I wanted, had seen a level of success that I wanted, but for some reason had always just been elusive to me. And the three people, they didn't know each other. They didn't know I was talking to the two other people, but they all said the exact same things. And they all said the same three things. Is you have to manage your budget appropriately, live within your means, and you have to be uh, sowing back into your community what you are receiving, and namely in tithing. Um, I was doing the first two perfectly. I mean, it was never a matter of managing the budget, living within my means. But they all three said the exact same thing. You have to give in order to receive. And so when you hear that from three different people who have no knowledge of the other conversation, you have to say, okay, there's something to this. And so I put a lot of prayerful energy into that. And after a what I made uncomfortable conversation with my wife, uh, I just decided one day I'm going to Friday I'm getting paid. Before I pay any bills out of this, I'm going to write 10% of this out without giving it a second thought. And it was an almost instant change that happened in me. Um, that I was traveling for work that Sunday, and we had a work conference, and that Monday I got to sit down with some of the top level people in my organization to find out my name's being spoken in some of the highest circles of the company. I got to sit down at dinner with a very prominent consultant that our company employs and share my testimony with him. And through those interactions, my career has taken off in a way that I've never seen before. I'm actually gotten now into the public speaking circuit, and that led me to the meditation that got me aligned clearly with my purpose, which I've now gone into the world of life coaching. I recently received my certification for that, and I'm going to spread the knowledge that I've learned over this past year to others. So not only did I receive abundance financially, I've also received it abundance in a sense of personal fulfillment, because now I feel like I'm
Mm.
also living within uh, God's clearly defined purpose for my life.
Ah, beautiful, beautiful. There's so much to unpack here. So let me just kind of review a little bit of what you said that resonated with me. So number one was you got advice from three different people, but it was all the three same three data points. Manage your budget, live within your means, and give back to the community, right? And so I know for a lot of people listening, my audience tends to be people that are open to spirituality, but are very much still kind of living in that grinding, hustling mentality of trying to achieve more and looking for some more purpose in their life. So I know that when I was younger, I grew up in San Francisco, so these concepts weren't new to me. But when people would talk about these concepts, I'd just be like, well, it's those hippies over on the corner, or maybe if you're like a billionaire, you might be able to pull this off. But for us normal people, like just trying to live abundantly and to give, like all of a sudden this magic is going to happen. So I'm just curious. You talked about how it was almost instantaneous, but I like to always try to, give people some practical, tactical ways that they could actually practice giving this abundance, or what the actual process was. And so I'm curious, because it happened so quickly, where you started giving 10% of your paycheck, and then all of a sudden you hear that you're being talked about in these circles at work. You're on this speaking circuit, and you're becoming a life coach. Can you kind of break down maybe a little bit more tactically, like, hey, this is how it happened step by step, so the people that are listening could have a few extra more tactical things that they could do other than give away 10% of their paycheck?
Sure. And it's not for everyone. It was, to be quite honest with you, it was almost irresponsible for me to give that 10% away. But I stepped out in faith, knowing that if I took this first step, that it was going to be in line with a greater good. And if I'm in line with the greater good, then nothing can stand against what I'm doing. Um, but you're right. There has to be a practical step, and giving financially isn't for everyone. That's why I also say um, a very valuable resource that we all have is our time. And if you can give your time, that's just as valuable as giving your money. And if you are caught in that hustle and bustle grind culture, um, you have lots of knowledge to impart on people. And if you can help the next person in line trying to accomplish what you're accomplishing, you can give them that hand up to take the next step in their career. And that's another way that you can live abundantly and give of yourself. Um, but for me, what I really found was, once I took that first step, and once I had that conversation where it was, I always knew the spiritual gifts that I was born with, but I also think that it is incumbent upon oneself to let those be drawn out of you by others. And so to hear from another person, like, oh, wow, you have a real knack for connecting with people, for listening to them and getting them to open up their heart to you, to actually allow for you to help them on their journey. That was what opened up to me to get on, to seek out life coaching. It was, oh, there was power in my testimony when I sat down at that table that night. And, he was said, you need to tell this story to more people. So the first thing that I always tell people is you need to be in community, whether that's a small group of people, your friends, if you want to join a small group of like-minded individuals, whatever it may be, surround yourself with people that have the same moral principles that you do and enjoy each other's company. So often we find, especially when you are getting obsessed with work and what you can accomplish in this life, you lose track of the fact that your most rewarding successes will have no financial gain associated with them. And it's when you separate yourself from that outcome and enrich your relationships that these natural gifts will be brought out of you. And that's then how you draw or step in line with your true divine purpose. And that's when these gifts will start to then open doors for you.
Yeah, you talked about, I believe you said you knew from a very young age that you had some spiritual gifts. Can you elucidate us a little bit more about your own self inquiry and discovery of these gifts? And that's actually something that's been something I've been contemplating a lot about, which is people who have heard this podcast, they've heard me talk about growing up as an atheist. And but the more stories I tell, I start realizing like, no, I was actually kind of following spirit quite a bit, but I would always ask, my mentors or people that I looked up to, for confirmation of some of the ideas that I was getting. And then I would go, okay, it's a good idea, and really think I was like a logical, rational thinker. But in reality, I was realizing that, I had some like divine intervention that was like guiding me in a certain direction. So I'm curious, how did you discover these gifts that you had?
Sure. And I think it's funny. I think we have the exact opposite upbringing. I'm from a small farming community in northern Indiana. I was raised in a very legalistic Christian household. So as far as like coming from a big city, growing up atheist, I think the polar opposite of that would be small town in Indiana, being raised in a very strict Christian household. But and here we are on the podcast, and we end up in the same spot. I think that's truly, again, another sign of divine synchronicity, if there ever was one. Um, I grew up, like I said, in a very legalistic Christian home. Uh, at a very young age, um, I was molested by a family friend. The person had my parents' trust, and they took advantage of that trust. And my entire life, I was raised in the spirit of the problems that you have, the trauma that you've lived through. The solution is always go to church and pray it away. What I needed to be doing was sitting on a therapist's couch unpacking the trauma that had happened to me. But because that wasn't a tool that was ever made available to my parents to overcome the trauma that they had in their childhood, that was never anything that was made available to me. Um, as I grew up, that the trauma of that made me very empathetic to other people's traumas. The So in a way, it was a blessing and a curse, because for me, it made me very introspective. It made me very quiet, and it took a lot for me to open up to other people. But through that, I learned the skill of getting others to open up to me, so that I didn't have to open up to them. And so again, a defense mechanism um, came through it. But what I found was it also gave me the ability to process information and communicate solutions in a way that were easy to understand, but also to really capture the person's attention and move with them through their heart connection to really bring about change for both of us. It was mutual. Um, and as I then graduated high school, um, there was a tragedy in our hometown. 3 of my friends were killed in a car accident. Um, and it was at that moment, through the process of that, me not being able to get any of the relief of the trauma symptoms that I had, plus then this horrible tragedy happens where 3 families now are destroyed because of a senseless car accident that happened to 3 kids that didn't deserve that. I gave up religion at that point, at the age of 18. Um, and so for 20 years, I uh, was either identified as agnostic or atheist. Um, and I met my wife. We got married 11 years ago. We have 4 beautiful children. And then right around the time my daughter turned 5, the same age that I was when I suffered my trauma as a child, I started to get very depressed. And then um, 3 years ago, something similar at school happened to my son, where it wasn't quite as grim as what happened to me. It triggered those emotions in me from a child, and because I hadn't had the proper therapy and the tools therapy provides to process the recurrence of that trauma, I fell into a major depressive episode. And I actually had committed myself to a plan to take my life. Um, and January 18th of last year, my wife and I sat down. She told me that she wasn't in love with me anymore and that she planned to end our marriage. And I didn't see a reason for me to stick around any longer. And so that night I sat in my living room by myself in complete quiet contemplation and weighed the pros and cons of just going ahead and following through with my plan. And I sat there for almost 4 hours. And about 2:30 in the morning, I decided I'm going to just cry out to God, if you're there, please give me a sign that this is not what I'm supposed to do right now. And within 10 seconds, I heard very distinctly in my left ear the voice of my 8-year-old son, and he just said one word, and the word was stay. And I looked around, and there was nobody in the room. And suddenly all the emotions that I had been feeling that had kept me restless were gone, and I needed to go to sleep, so I went to sleep. I woke up the next morning, got ready for work, got the kids ready for work or school, and I just decided I wasn't going to work that day. So I got out my phone, I opened up YouTube, and decided I'm going to go for a walk. And the first thing that YouTube recommended to me was a sermon by a pastor out of Atlanta by the name of Andy Stanley, and the topic was surrender your will. It's like, okay, that's at that time I didn't believe in synchronicities at all, so I said that's odd, but I'll listen to it. And the theme was once you recognize the presence of God in your life, in order for Him to move, you need to surrender your will. And it was at that moment then I said, all right, there's definitely something to this. And so I decided to do the work. Saw a psychiatrist the next day. I saw a therapist a week later. And through that, I have formed new friendships. I reconnected with my old friend, Mr. Hornberger. And I have found a new sense of purpose in my community and in my family. It's in a different capacity now, but I'm also the happiest and healthiest I've ever been. And to give you some insight, and this was a little strange, this is the second podcast I've been interviewed for on a similar topic. Yeah, I hadn't checked LinkedIn in weeks, and I sign on. I was doing my daily afternoon meditation, just asking, how can I be a conduit of your love in this world, God? And I sign on to LinkedIn, and I see a post from you that's very eloquently written about how, the role of God in your life and in your professional life. And I just wrote a little comment in passing, and you asked me on the show. And it's, again, it's just a sign of how these things happen for a reason. And then yesterday, as I was preparing for this conversation, I'm sitting, I've got my laptop open, I check the calendar to make sure the invite's on there, and it's February 4th. It's 1 year, the 1 year anniversary of the day that I had scheduled to take my life. And here I am 1 year and 1 day later getting to talk about my spiritual life with you on this podcast. So you can choose to write these things off, and any rational person would. I mean, I lived in that for 20 years. But when you open yourself up to the possibility that there is something greater working for your good, the sense of calm that you have in your spirit, the sense of humility that you gain, John Bevere calls it the reverential fear of God. You sit with this awe-inspired uh, reverence for the creator of the universe, who is so big and created literally everything within our existence, but still is has the capacity to love you personally and individually. Like that humility, that sense of warmth that can bring your spirit, can drive you anywhere that you want in this world. And it's such a freeing feeling to say that.
Wow, wow, what a story. Number one, thank you for being so honest and transparent with all the details, from yourself to what happened to your children, to your wife telling you that she wanted to have a divorce. I mean, when I was talking earlier about like sharing origin stories, like this is the type of story that I was talking about that is like so powerful, that I know that there are other people that have felt, I don't even want to say other people. I have felt like that at that point where like, wow, I've been living like the right way, but all these wrong things are happening to me. Like my best friends are turning against me. My business partners are robbing me. Like, what am I here for? And then just asking that deeper question, like, what am I here for? Is there something here for me? And that was like, as you were telling that story and you just said, hey, like before I'm going to off myself, I'm just going to ask God, like, is there a reason? And then you heard the voice of your son. And, coming from a logical, rational background, it's like, okay, well, maybe he just heard what he needed to hear, or it was his subconscious speaking. But you use the word synchronicity quite a bit. And that's also one of my favorite words, where it's like, no, what I've come to realize is there's something beyond logical and rational thinking. And in one of my meditations, I got this message that was like, Seibo, if you really want to be connected to source energy, be connected to God, it's not an exercise that you can experience through thinking. Through your mind is not going to be able to grasp it. But if you try to connect with your heart is going to have this like feeling of, as you said, like being connected to this thing that is literally everything, but at the same time could still focus on you and give you unconditional love. And what a powerful feeling to know that you're connected to something so powerful. And so, as I said, you using the word synchronicity came up quite a bit as you were speaking about various things. What is the importance, or how did that word become important to you, and how do you use it to navigate and guide yourself?
Well, it's just one of those things. I think it's in the way that Carl Jung describes it. It's two or more events that are connected, but not through any external causal mechanism. And I take that to mean two completely unrelated things have only one thing that connects them, and that's you. There is nothing outside of them that can bring them together except through your existence. And so for me, uh, you just you can pass them off as coincidence, and any rational, reasonable person will do that. But it gets to a point where if you simply make yourself open to the possibility that there is a higher good working for you and wants to see you living your best and most fulfilled life, if you can simply surrender to that idea, everything in life takes on a different and more meaning, like deeper meaning. And so when you see things that come together, like I was just saying earlier with doing my pre-work for this conversation, um, and meditating, praying, how can I make this more impactful? How can I make my voice um, relate to more people? Um, the message I got was, you got to be hot, you got to be honest, you got to be open, you got to be transparent. because I didn't want to tell that story about my childhood. I didn't want to tell a story about what happened in my marriage. But if I don't tell that, it doesn't give the entire picture. I have every reason to keep those details to myself forever. Um, they're not easy to say. And quite honestly, in certain instances, they're quite embarrassing to talk about. But if I don't tell those stories, if I'm not completely honest, open, and transparent about them, um, the gravity is not going to come through in the message. So we have to just own where we're at. We have to own our experience, and um, we got to be honest about it.
Yeah, yeah. In one of my meditations, um, God had shown me that synchronicities are like the little breadcrumbs that He's leaving for us to follow. And it's like a wonderful way of just knowing if you're on the right path or not. And as we had both kind of stated numerous times, that if you're a rational, logical person, it's very easy to use like statistics to just say, yeah, of course, like some random stuff is going to coincide and it's going to make you feel like, oh, this was meant to be. But I think if you are sensitive to watching for these synchronicities, you start seeing like, no, this is actually like happening more and more. And if you were to look at statistics, like having 5 or 6 of them happen in a row is kind of like beating kind of like the statistical odds of like these things happening back to back to back. So I think this is important for people to hear because, I don't think, both of us are spiritually connected, but we're not like Bible thumpers or dogmatic in our beliefs, or at least I don't believe we are. I don't think I come off that way. But another thing that you said that resonate, or actually, before we jump to that, I was actually curious. So what happened between you and your wife? Did you guys work things out, or did you guys end up going separate ways?
We are in the process of going our separate ways, yes.
Okay. Okay. All right. And so as you are going through this process and still going through this process, you talked about meditation and prayer. How do you delineate between the two?
Sure. I typically pray as a lead into my meditation. Um, you know, I said it earlier. I'm not a religious person, but I am a Jesus follower. That is one of the divine ironies of this whole thing. Is the mechanism that caused me so much hurt as a child is now something that's been my source of greatest deliverance. Um, but I found that if I pray, I open myself up, just open that God channel, say, show me what you want to show me. And then what I like to do is sit in absolute silence um, so that I can receive. That is how I get the greatest gift through my meditation, if you will. Because for me, if the first time that I really sat down and can say that I did a really meaningful, non-guided meditation. Um, a life coach friend of mine, Henry West, told me you should sit in silence. He's like, okay, that's how I know. You need to set aside 1 hour of your time to sit in absolute silence. It's like, okay, that's terrifying. If you're like me, you've been working for better part of 2 decades, day and night, every waking moment. You've got something to do. You've got something to be focusing on. But to set a timer on your phone, and in a well lit room with no internet, no TV, just sit and be with yourself in complete presence. Uh, that was the scariest thing anybody's ever said to me as an adult. Um, and so I didn't know what to do. And so I got the idea to do a gratitude exercise. And it came to me through prayer because it's like, okay, I'm going to sit here, God. I'm going to do this meditation. I'm afraid of what it's going to show me. And I'm afraid of what I will see. But I want you to show me what I need to see through this practice. And it was in that moment I said, fill me with gratitude, humble my spirit, and make me an open receiver to your message. And, ended the prayer and it's like, I'm going to do that. So I went through, and that first part of the hour, I sat and I thought, I went through each of my children and I expounded as far as I could on each and every way that I'm grateful for each one of them. And then the last person on the list was my wife. And I thought about how, in each and every way, that I am grateful for her and the presence she's been in my life. And by the time I got done with that, the timer went off on my phone. And I had spent an entire hour distraction free to allow myself the time to just be grateful for the people that I'm closest to in my entire life. And not only was that the biggest revelation, the biggest single revelation I've ever had, is how much I actually do have to be grateful for in my life. A lot of people could see where I was um, as being a tremendous negative in my life, but it's actually been the greatest positive of my life. And the meditation practice has been the instrument through which that reframing has happened.
Wow. You know, I've been coaching now for a little bit over 3 years. And when I look at all of my past clients and I check back in with them and I see how they're doing, a lot of them, they go back to their regular lives, some improvements, some setbacks, things of that nature. It's very natural. But when I look at the ones that seem to be doing the best, that are very joyful, that are grounded, that are present with life, those are the ones that have a consistent meditation practice. And so as I started looking at, just my list of clients and what has helped me the most, I would say absolutely meditation is the thing that keeps me grounded. And as a matter of fact, like when I look at society, I used to think about society as like, oh, you're either like a Android user or an iOS user or a conservative or a liberal. But now, when I look at the world, I kind of look at people as like, are you connected or not connected? And those that are connected seem to have like this ease, seem to have things like kind of just flow. They don't have to be the doer of everything. They could surrender and kind of allow things to happen through them and be the vessel. And, as like, you're speaking and I'm remembering parts of your story. Like one of the things that is coming to me is really thinking about how all of these tragedies and all of these negative events actually synchronistically led you to this reconnection with God, this reconnection with faith. And that's one of the things that, in my meditations, I've been told, and one of the things that I've been hesitant to talk about was like, well, hey, if there is a God or if there is this all, powerful being that is, the creator of this universe, then he must be a sicko because look at all these negative things happening. Look at these wars. Look at child trafficking. Look at, domestic violence, things of this nature. And this is actually the first time I'm saying this out loud. I've said this in private, but what I was shown was that these two are all synchronistic events to open you up. And, when I experienced these very traumatic things in my life, I was forced to, I had depression. And it was one of those things where instead of looking for answers outside of me, I just started going within me. And through being depressed and going within myself, I realized that that's where I could find the answers that were true for me. And then I started realizing, wow, like the experience of going through these things was, objectively, it was a negative experience. But what I learned and what I gained from these experiences, were truly gifts. And, as I said, I've been very uncomfortable about talking about this in public because it's like, well, hey, did I ask to be molested? Did I ask for these wars? It's like, no, I'm not saying you asked for them, but I'm saying that these things happen to specific people in order to give them a specific experience that is there for their greater good. And I was just curious, what you thought about what I just shared.
I wouldn't trade the experience of my life for anything. because I sit here in this seat right now speaking to you as a result of all those things. Had one of those horrible things not happened to me, I wouldn't be here and I wouldn't be able to give this word to the world. So no. It sucks the amount of things that I had to do and go through to get this kind of strength to talk to you like this. Yes. Does it make me a better father at the end of the day? Absolutely. And if that is the result, everything was worth it. And again, it was through careful contemplation and meditation that I was able to find that. And I think we should dispel, because a lot of people have really negative connotations or ideas of what meditation is. I'm not sitting chanting my ohms, ringing the little Tibetan bells, listening to my binaural beats, although I have done all those things and I have to say they're pretty awesome. Um, but as simple as taking 10 minutes out of your day to just sit and recognize the thoughts that you have and sit with yourself and try and find out why you're thinking those, especially if you're somebody who deals with circular thoughts, spiraling thoughts, anxiety, thoughts of depression, or you just don't, or you feel like you lack direction in your life. You have to allow yourself space with yourself in order for you to truly understand who you are and where you are going. And had I not set out from the very beginning to allow myself that space, I would have fallen right back into addiction. I would have spiraled by now, and probably seen the worst case scenario play out in my life. But it was because I made a conscious decision to explore who I was at my deepest inner core that I was able to find my core values and start to embody them in my day-to-day life.
Yeah, yeah. So I love how you were clarifying meditation. I think that, when I ask people about meditation and what their definition of meditation is, I get all sorts of, different varying responses. And similar to you when you're talking about the binaural beats and the Tibetan sound bowls, things of that nature, like there are like so many different ways. And, I'm just curious, like, you talked about how you'd start off with some prayer, then you'd ask a question. When I tell people to, what's the best way to start meditating, I tell them, if you're trying to clear out your mind free of thoughts, it's going to be really difficult. We've had a whole lifetime of just ruminating on thoughts over and over and over again. So typically I tell them, hey, just focus on your in-breath and your out-breath. Count to 1 when you're breathing in, count to 2 when you exhale, and try to get to 100. And it's a pretty interesting exercise, because most of the times my clients will text me and they're like, dude, I can't even get to 15 or 20. And, before I start thinking about other things. And so I'm curious, do you have any suggestions or tips for people that want to meditate not just for stress relief, but meditating and getting this connection to something greater than themselves?
Yeah. Again, I highly recommend gratitude exercises. I think breath work should be the framework for any meditation. And that's actually something, breath work is key if you struggle with depression, if you struggle with anxiety, racing thoughts. I've taught my 2 oldest children breath work. We do 4-6 breath whenever we get into those anxious thought spirals, which is an in breath of 4 through the nose and exhale of 6 out of the mouth. Um, and usually, if we can get 5 to 8 of those, we can calm our nervous system down enough that we can really sit with and find out what the thought pattern is that's bothering us. And for me, like, I had always heard of meditation as this like silly weird thing that people did in Southeast Asian traditions, or the hippies that I saw on Fish Lot, when I was into that. I mean, I still am, just in a different capacity. But it's really what you make of it. And what you're really doing is you're setting aside conscious time for yourself. And if you struggle with the idea of how to get started, start with gratitude. It's the most basic human need that you see met on a daily basis, is just thinking about the things that you are grateful for. Because if you really sit down and you really think about it, um, you can invent things to be grateful for. And this is speaking as somebody who has been through the deepest depths of clinical depression. If you sit down and you focus on your breath and center your mind on where you are in that present moment, you can literally invent things to be grateful for in that moment, and they will serve your purpose. For me, those first few times, I was grateful for central air conditioning. I was grateful that I was in a room that had carpet instead of a wood floor. Um, you can find things to be grateful for. And once you get into a practice of conscious gratitude, you can start to turn the wheels um, in your mind that will then bear fruit in your life that can create serious improvement.
Well, we are definitely soul brothers. Gratitude is one of the things that when I observe, when I look at like my group of friends and I rank them in order of like financial abundance, I think on the surface, a lot of people would think those with more financial abundance are happier. But when I did that exercise and I kind of just ranked them like, how happy are they with their lives? Like there was no correlation to how much they made. But when I rearranged that list of like who has the most gratitude and who has the least gratitude, then there was a 100% correlation between those that had the highest amount of gratitude and that they had the highest amount of joy. And what I really loved is that you talked about you could literally invent ways to be grateful. And, like I have a lot of friends that if you were to bracket their income, they would be in the 1%. And then when I call them, hey, John, how are you doing? They'll be like, yeah, everything's all right. But, my boss is doing this. My car, my Tesla has a flat. My, my roof shingles on my mansion are all messed up. And I'm like, all right, like after, 10 minutes of listening to this kind of kills the vibe of the situation. And I start realizing, wow, like just like you could invent things to be grateful for. Hey, I got carpet instead of hardwood floor. Hey, instead of we had a tree fall down in our yard because of the windstorms, like, hey, we have like 40 other trees that didn't fall down. How lucky we are versus focusing on the tree that did fall, which now my neighbor's going to bring a chainsaw over. I've never used a chainsaw, so I'll get a chance to learn how to use a chainsaw. But, I think for a lot of people, let me just speak for myself was, as I said, I'm not new to these ideas, but when kind of the more hippie folks would say like, think of things to be grateful for, it just seemed like that's hard for me to focus my mind on. But then I started realizing like, oh, I'm literally inventing things for me to be upset about. So why couldn't I invent things to be grateful for? And so I always like to get tactical. Hey, on the high level or high strategic level, be more grateful. You'll be happy. So what are some ways that you could practice gratitude in your life?
And you touched on something that's so pivotal there. It is so much easier to be negative. It is so easy to complain. Um, and again, I think if you look at human nature, we're all inherently narcissistic, and it's not natural for us to think of things through other people's perspective. So if we're only looking for ways that things are going wrong, you're going to see them. If you buy yourself a Ford Explorer, the first 3 days you're in your new car, you're only going to see other Ford Explorers. And I say that because I got a new car last week, so that's fresh on my mind. But yeah, if you paint your house red because you think you're the only house in the neighborhood that's going to be red, you're going to notice all the neighbors that have different shades of red for their house. Um, so it takes a kind of conscious reframing of your mind. You have to um, go within and draw out the part of you that seeks the good. And again, when you are in that constant framework of hustle, when you are, when's the next contract coming in? When's the next quota going to be released? How are we going to make budget this week? How many hours am I going to have to work to get this content out? it's really, really easy to focus only on those things. And deadlines, quotas, they tend to place a negative connotation in your mind because they can either be the thing that it's either a goal or it's a deadline. You can frame that in a negative or a positive way. And for me, the instrument that allowed me to reframe that perspective was through my meditation practice. And that's why I always say gratitude's got to be the key. You have to dig deep within and you have to find the things that you're grateful for, or these other things are just going to be taxing on you, both physically and spiritually. And if you can't overcome that, um, you're just punching your ticket for an early grave. So that's really the biggest takeaway for me is you have to release all that from you, because if you want to live a happily, long, and fulfilled life, it does not coexist with that negative mindset.
Yeah. Yeah. So is there, like my children and I, before dinner, we always talk about three different things that we're grateful for. And I found like after doing this for a couple of years, they kind of have like their go-to things like, hey, I'm grateful for this food. I'm grateful for, awesome parents. I'm grateful for like a cool sister. And, I've noticed that because they've gotten kind of used to saying this, they're not putting a lot of thought into, what they're actually grateful for. So do you have one piece of tactical advice that you could give our listeners on how they could practice gratitude today?
Sure. One, and I'll give you a little tidbit of advice there because I struggle with that too, trying to get creative with it. I went from asking, how was your day? What are you grateful for today? Because you are going to get that same answer every day. Um, I like to ask my kids, what was the best part of your day? What was the most challenging part of the day?
Mm.
Is there something you thought you could have done better? Um, and yeah, recess wins that first question a lot, but they're in elementary school still. But you say, you're always going to get a different answer. It might be from this about the same kid, but it's a different story. And is there something you could have done better? And that question has actually opened up a few conversations with my daughter. She's like, yeah, I didn't really like the way that I acted when I first woke up because I felt like I wasn't very nice to you. And that's, again, just another way for us to connect. Um, and now I went off on that tangent. I forgot your question. Sorry.
Oh yeah, yeah. Is there one like tactical technique, like a gratitude journal? We've created this thing called the gratitude jar at our house, where we have some post-its and sticky notes. So like as they walk past the jar, they'll just write something that they're grateful for, and at the end of the week, we'll just kind of look at it, do something fun. Is there any other techniques to practice gratitude that our listeners could do today?
Sure. I actually started, and it was put to me on January 1st to do a 100-day gratitude journal. And it's every day write down one thing you're grateful for. And I will share that if that day I feel inspired to write about one of my children. Right before bed, I share that with them. Say, hey, you came into my mind this afternoon when I was writing my gratitude journal, and I wanted to tell you I'm really grateful for this thing that you do. Um, there isn't necessarily an expectation of reciprocity with that for me, but it is planting that seed with my children that um, just from time to time, I will, they will be the sole center of my focus because they mean that much to me. And then I found another way that you can do that if you're struggling with the idea. Get real quiet. Somebody look them right in the eye and say, "Hey, I thank God for you every day." And if you can say that
Mm.
to somebody, and with genuine honesty, they will feel that warmth in your voice, and that will open up these beautiful um, and open dialogues about whatever they are going through with you. And so for me, like I like to take my daughter, my son, or one of my twin boys from by the chin. The twins are 4, so they don't really get it yet. But if my daughter, I just put my hand under her chin, look her right in the eye, and say, "I thank God for you every day." That always turns into this beautiful conversation about whatever she's going through at that moment. And so,
Wow.
yeah, for parenting, I think it's important you acknowledge the existence of God so that your children have a strong framework of where you're coming from, and that also opens them up then to exploring it. But when you tell them, that the thing that you are most thankful for right now is them, that leaves a lasting impact that you can see immediately.
Wow, wow, that's beautiful. And how old is your daughter?
She's 10.
10? Ah, that's cool. That's cool that that's the opening for deeper conversations. And I had recently read a study that when you receive gratitude from someone, your like dopamine and serotonin levels boost up temporarily. But the surprising thing about the study was the person that gives the compliment or the person that expresses gratitude, their dopamine and serotonin levels actually jump up higher than the person receiving it. So I like to think of it as like you're almost your own drug dealer, except you're dealing out gratitude instead of harmful
Yeah,
drugs and things of that nature.
right. And the buzz is definitely cheaper for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we got about another 5 to 10 minutes here. You brought up breath work a few times. You know, for people that have trouble meditating, I usually start them off on breath work. But can you talk to us about how you utilize breath work in your life and what benefits you've gotten?
Sure. Well, for instance, like I wanted to seem like I was in a natural, free flowing conversational state before our conversation. So I was sitting here doing the physiological sigh, which is, one great big deep breath through the nose. And once your lungs are full, do a quick little right there at the end and then let it out, which, Andrew Huberman's big on. 4-6 breathing is good in a stressful situation, which again is four a 4 count through the nose and a 6 count on the exhale through the mouth. Those two I find the most beneficial, especially when I'm going into a tense conversation. Um, if I am dealing with something stressful at work, or just the idea of having to have an uncomfortable conversation, a 4-6 breath gets me every time. Um, the I like to do 4-7-8 breaths to help myself go to sleep, which is a 4 count inhale through the nose, hold for 7, exhale for 8. And do that for 3 minutes. You should be able to fall asleep no problem. And then also box breathing is a tremendous asset for anyone who has a stressful job. Um, do 3 minutes of box breathing, which is a 4-second inhale through the nose, hold for 4 seconds, exhale 4 seconds through the mouth, hold for 4 seconds. Um, if you just have a tense day coming up, when you first wake up, naturally always thank God for the abundance in your life, and then do 3 minutes of box breathing, and you will set yourself up off on a nice level plane of existence that will carry with you throughout your entire day, no matter what you come up against.
That's really awesome. And as you were describing the 4-6 breathing, I was speaking to a friend yesterday. He practices Kriya Yoga, and in Kriya Yoga, the one of the main tenets is to really try to have this Kundalini release and feel that oneness with the universe, this oneness with God. And it starts off by doing a similar breathing to the 4-6. And essentially, if you could go 6-8 or 8-10, meaning that the exhale is just a little bit longer than the inhale and really slow it down. Well, number one, we know it activates the parasympathetic nervous system, but he was telling me that as he does this, before his meditation and he drops into his meditation, he feels that he has a much stronger and clearer connection to source and is able to really quiet the mind and get the downloads that are needed to guide him throughout that day. And I'm curious, as you're doing your breathwork exercises, does it have any type of similar effect for you?
Absolutely. We live in such a technology driven age where your life, like every second of your waking day, someone's vying for your attention. And to try and master meditation in a really meaningful way, you have to have that disconnect. And breath work is how I unplug. You have to physically kind of just remove yourself from that mainframe so that you can center your thoughts in a way that's healthy for you to master true presence. And so for me, breath work is just kind of like where you step through that threshold and really clear your mind. So you give yourself that permission to disconnect for that moment.
Yeah. Oh man, this has been a really, really awesome conversation, Seth. So before we let you go, I wanted to ask you, do you have, if you were given the ability, I want to open it up, the floor to you to just communicate to the audience, what is something that's very important that you'd like to communicate to them?
Everyone that you run into is going to through experiences that you have no idea about, and the most uh, meaningful gift that you could give any one of them is a little bit of understanding and a whole lot of empathy. So when you go out into the world after hearing this podcast, go out with kindness and greet the world with a loving smile, and everything's going to be okay.
I love it. I love it. What I was hearing was, let love be the dominant emotion in your life. When you see others doing things that may be abrasive or trigger you, know that maybe if you went through what they went through, you would be responding and acting the same way. And to have more grace and patience and openness for people like that. And that really resonates with me. I used to live in San Francisco, hyper progressive area. Now I live in a conservative area. And when I first moved here, my neighbors were like, oh man, just another snowflake from San Francisco. And as we just spent more time, spending time with each other, not really like focusing on our differences politically. And I wouldn't say like I'm like a hyper progressive anyways, I just happen to be from that area. Is that where we're able to build like really tight relationships. Like one day we'll be watching UFC together, the next day we'll be doing breath work. And it's been this really great exchange of ideas, concepts, and understanding that whether you're pro-vax, anti-vax, a Biden person, a Trump person, one thing's for sure is everyone wants a better world. Like no one's like, yeah, I want this guy to be voted in because, fuck everyone else, like
Mm-hmm.
everyone truly believes that what they believe in, the world would be a better place. And I think if you could allow people, or if you could see that that's how people are thinking, then if you encounter someone with a different ideology, different theological beliefs, like you'll be much more open to listening, receiving, and understanding. And I do believe that once you start understanding like why people think the way that they think, it starts making sense. Like one of my neighbors who is from Arkansas, he told me that he was against immigration because there was like 3 immigrants in his town and one of them robbed his aunt. And so if you have 3 immigrants in your town and one of them robbed your aunt, well, that's 1/3 of them are bad people, right? And even though that's not a statistically relevant number, like if I got robbed by someone that looked a certain amount of way and there wasn't like a lot of those types of people in my town, I could totally see myself going, oh, that type of person is scary. And so I really love like that last piece of advice because I do believe that, when I find myself triggered, when I find myself disagreeing with someone online or in real life, I just remember, hey, how can I kind of open up to this person's ideas? How can I see them as a child of God? And how can I connect with them instead of how can I just, try to throw them aside? And I found that to be like so much more nourishing way to live life and allowed me to see things from so many more perspectives where to me it almost doesn't matter, or it doesn't matter like what your political beliefs are. What matters to me is, are you a loving person and how do you treat people? So I really appreciate that, Seth. And if people want to hire you as a coach or if people want to, get more of what you've been talking about, what's the best way for them to connect and find you?
Oh yeah, you can find me right now on LinkedIn. You can find me on Facebook. I also have a business page. It's Intersection Life Coaching, and you can connect with me through Instagram. All easy to find there.
All right, and that's at Seth Ramser or
It's Mr. Palmer's Concern.
Mr. Palmer's
It's
Concern.
it's
All
an
right,
obscure fish reference. I'll be honest about it.
Well, you're going against the grain of what the other influencers are doing with the most obvious types of names, but I'll make sure that we drop all the links in the show notes, and maybe I'll even add a little graphic to this screen as we're editing this. But Seth, this has been a beautiful conversation. I really appreciate you coming on here, your vulnerability, your honesty. You know, this is something that I'm really working on as well. So as you were telling your story as truthfully, as vulnerably, as authentically as possible, I wanted to let you know that really resonates with me, because one of the things that I get during my meditations is when people ask me where I get this information from. You know, before I would always say, well, you know, like I studied these books and things of that nature, but they had told me, or God had told me, I have to say I'm getting it from my meditations and it's coming straight from source. And at first it was, and still it's a little bit of a challenge, because I've never utilized this language privately or publicly. And all of a sudden when people are asking me like, hey, where do you get these ideas? It's like, well, God gave it to me. You know, like coming from my atheist background, it's almost like coming out of the closet in a different way. So I really appreciated how we kind of started off on opposite ends of the spectrum, then went to the opposite ends of the spectrum, and then kind of found our way back to this connection. And to me, that's a really beautiful part of the cycle, which is, you know, I think, how can you know that you're connected if you're never separated? So even that separation has some synchronistic purpose in this greater, you know, multi-level video game that we call the universe of life.
That's beautifully said. Thank you so much, Seibo, for the opportunity. I really appreciated the conversation today.
All right, beautiful, Seth. Well, thank you for coming on, and thank you everyone who has been listening. If you appreciate it, go follow Seth on his channels, and I'll be back next week with another awesome guest. Take care, everyone. Thank you, beautiful people. I hope you enjoyed this awesome episode with Seth Ramser. And if you did enjoy, I would really appreciate a review, sharing this with friends, anything that you could do to help us grow the channel. I would deeply appreciate it. And thank you, and I will see you next week.